This week on the Wheelhouse. Divisive discourse. Is anywhere a safe space for political debate? For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. The death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk has sparked a re-examination of political discourse in America. Kirk's killing and subsequent statements from both parties showed glimpses of bipartisan unity, but the shooting also reignited fears about political violence and whether civil debate actually has a future in America. Here in Connecticut, college students are working together to find common ground. Shortly after Kirk was assassinated, the Connecticut Young Republicans and the Young Democrats issued a joint statement condemning the violence. Today, we're talking with college students about the state of American political rhetoric and whether they see a path forward. Last week, on day one of the government shutdown, we taped a conversation with two UConn students, Geoffrey Medeiros, the president of the UConn College Republicans, and Ryan Rosario, the president of the UConn College Democrats. Our conversation on political discourse starts with a bit of a personal story, me talking to Geoffrey and Ryan about how I handled Kirk's killing as both a journalist and as a teacher. These guys go to UConn. I will disclose that I get paid by the University of Connecticut to do part-time work as an adjunct professor in the journalism department. I don't teach Geoffrey or Ryan, though. I did have class on the day that Charlie Kirk was killed. It was shortly after the shooting, and the students were sort of buzzing as they walked in to the classroom. And they wanted me to address the shooting. They wanted me to talk about it, and using my instinct as a journalist, in my second class ever, I'll say, as an adjunct professor, I decided that we should probably talk about gun violence, how to cover gun violence, victims of gun violence, mass shootings. That's how I handled it. Did your professors talk to you about it? Did you want them to address it?
You know, it's the only conversation that anybody could really have at that moment, right? I think on a college campus, people are interested in social movements. They're interested in change, right? If you go to a college campus, I think everyone there knows who Charlie Kirk is, right? Because he's made himself so available to college students, right? This is what he does. He goes to campus, he talks to people. We've all seen the clips, you know? And I think that in that moment, I was really seeing a lot of people struggling to think about how to respond. And, you know, I had serious disagreements with Charlie Kirk, right? My entire life, the way he went around politics. But to tell you the truth, you know, I grew up watching those clips. I think in many ways learned to debate by watching the man, right? And I, in many ways, did have an extreme level of respect for him. And I think that it was really crushing that day because it almost felt like I didn't know him, but it felt like losing someone that I'd known my whole life, right? That in many ways was almost kind of like an influence in how I approached debate. And I remember being in class, and my professor, who was a history professor, really didn't want to, you know, touch on it. But I was stewing the whole time because I was checking the news over and over and over again because we didn't get an update on his health for a little while. And it was, you know, like an incredibly uncomfortable hour and a half because I almost wished that he would say something about it because I couldn't just sit on that for an hour in class, you know, and just think about what happened to him, you know.
Do you have a similar kind of experience with Charlie Kirk? Watching the videos, did you share that kind of similar sentiment to where you were feeling like you were at a loss?
Absolutely. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Charlie Kirk last year in July. And ever since I was interested in politics, maybe when I was 15, 16, especially around COVID time, one of the reasons why I got into politics was because of his videos and his influence. And like I said, I had the pleasure of meeting him. And he just really overall had a great impact on my life and my politics as well. Although we didn't agree on everything, I would say that he was a big influence on my political beliefs.
What about admins? What about departments? Even your faculty advisors for college Democrats or college Republicans, are they kind of giving you any guidance on how to really go about this topic? So there might be intentionality with how you all speak. Is there anybody from the outside sort of telling you how you should address this?
I wouldn't say they would tell us exactly what to say in situations like we're in now, but our faculty advisor, we spoke about it. We spoke about the tragedy. And I guess we spoke about how to move forward and how we can't let this deter us from speaking up.
Is there a concern about speaking out when you say that? Follow up with that, because you're nervous about the violence aspect, right? You're saying that somebody got shot for their political views. Is that something that concerns you, that, if you're vocal, that something can happen to you, not something similar, but that you could face some kind of punishment?
Yeah, and I've spoken to many conservatives around campus, and now, even before this tragedy, they felt that they would be left out because of their views. Maybe they're not going to do as well in a class if they speak up. Maybe they're going to not have as many friends because of their beliefs. And now, because of what happened, they literally have a target on their back. And stuff like that just gets a little scary, that there's people out there that, because I think the way I think, that they would want someone like Charlie Kirk dead.
You're from the other side of the aisle, at least in terms of being a part of college Democrats. Do you share that same kind of fear that you face reprisal for some of your political beliefs?
I mean, well, certainly. I mean, we saw it on campus, right? And I think that, for starters, right, in terms of, talking to people or advisors and that kind of thing, I think that we really didn't need that level of guidance, right? We need to talk to people about these things, of course, but we represented ourselves as two organizations in a class act way. I really think so. We were taking the lead of another class act organization, the Young Democrats of Connecticut and the Young Republicans, who also authored a co-authored statement denouncing violence, right? When we look at violence and we look at, this, political environment of polarization that we've created in the United States, I think these are things that come from the top down, right? And I think that the way that we limit these opportunities is by taking the lead as youth students to address how we are going to go about it and how we are going to go about building a safer community on campus, right? But there are students from the left that have been attacked for their political, ideas on campus. And I think that this is something that addresses all political communities. I think that the attacks on free speech as a whole recently have been very scary, from what's happened to conservatives, which I disavow entirely, but also what's happened to leftist protesters on campus being arrested for advocating for their policy in the Middle East, are also being targeted by organizations like the Canary Project, which are doxing student protesters and throwing their information out online for expressing their freedom of speech.
You were both quoted in local media, I think that same day, by the end of the 10th. Jeremy Chen of NBC Connecticut spoke to both of you. How did you go about gathering your words and being intentional about how you're messaging and how you would sound so soon after the news broke?
I thought it was important that we got together. We obviously disavowed what happened, and I think it was a moment where we needed to set a good example that this kind of stuff shouldn't happen in this country. It shouldn't happen ever again. And in order to do that, we need to come together and show that it's okay to disagree, but violence has no place in this nation.
Ryan, how did you kind of approach the situation?
Absolutely. Well, we looked at it just about the same way, right? I think that we have a lot of pride in the way that we conduct ourselves and the way that we have a really great relationship with Geoffrey and the club, despite the fact that, we have, serious disagreements on policy and, politics, right? We can agree wholeheartedly on one thing, which is that the way we settle these disagreements is through debate, it's through composure, it's never through violence. And so I knew in that moment that, me and Geoffrey, heart to heart, completely agreed on how we'd respond to this. And, the way that we went about responding to it wasn't very difficult. I feel like we knew exactly what we had, the statement that we had to put out, how important that it was. But what was, I think, heartwarming is the fact that we were able to get together so quickly and agree on how we can put this out.
Journalism department at UConn is talking about, with students, what it means to have free speech on campus. You both just touched on it, something colleges have wrestled with for years, obviously, how the First Amendment applies to students and what limits, if any, a college can or should place on inviting controversial speakers to campus. What does free speech mean to you, Geoffrey, on the college campus?
I think a student shouldn't have to be afraid to say what they have to say. So long as they don't incite violence, no matter what their speech is, they shouldn't be getting bad grades because of what they believe in.
Ryan, you've heard what Geoffrey had to say. What are your thoughts about free speech and what it means to you on a college campus?
I think free speech is something that comes with very, very, very few exceptions. I think when you have someone that's being, actively advocating for violence or, expressing like direct hate speech, I think that's a different situation. But having controversial speakers come to campus is paramount to the college experience, right? We are here to be challenged in our beliefs. We're here to hear things that we may not agree with. And I think that controversial speakers coming to any campus is something that should be protected in every regard, right? When we look at free speech, I think it's something that we have to be very consistent about. And we can't play games where we'll have our controversial speaker, you can't have yours, you know? I think that we should defend people's rights to be able to bring about any types of expression that they believe in on campus, as long as they're not being, directly violent, right? I think that building free speech begins with building debate on campus, right? And I think the better relationship that we have together and being able to talk about the things that we disagree with brings about a culture where it's a lot safer for us to have these conversations on campus, because now people are prepared to be able to advocate for what they believe in, right? And I think that the campus sometimes gets worried about counter-protesters, that kind of thing, but those are just two different aisles of the same free speech argument. And I think that if you're going to have a speaker come in to talk about something that's, very controversial, you're going to have counter-protesters that are, outside saying a few things. And I think both of those people need to be protected. And it may not look very clean. It's messy for a college campus, but that is the nature of politics, and that's the nature of gridlock, and that's the nature of being able to actually, fight for freedom of expression. It's not always beautiful.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is the Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. Today we're talking with college students about the state of American political rhetoric and whether they see a path forward. Geoffrey Medeiros, you see the president of the UConn College Republicans, and Ryan Rosario is the president of the UConn College Democrats. Coming up, issues students care about on their campus and whether or not these two young political leaders think constructive debate is possible in 2025. You're listening to the Wheelhouse. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. This hour, we're talking about political discourse, and we've got two campus political leaders on the show to learn about their approach to debate on divisive topics. Still with us are Geoffrey Medeiros, the president of College Republicans at the University of Connecticut, and Ryan Rosario, the College Democrats president at UConn. Let's hop back into our conversation on the state of political discourse on college campuses. We taped this last week on day one of the government shutdown. What are some of the most controversial topics among students on campus right now? Is the heat sort of ratcheting up in terms of political discourse?
I would say yes. I think the single most divisive issue on college campuses right now is the war in Gaza.
Sure.
And that's something that I think that students across the board are having trouble being able to digest and see the images that we see in the news every single day, and see how we can even begin to process that. And from my position, being in quite a unique one, being president of College Democrats of Connecticut, I'm stuck between two worlds where I have an active student body that is day in after day, seeing these images and asking, why as a party aren't we doing more to quell some of the responses that's happening here? Why aren't we addressing the major humanitarian crisis that we see day in and day out? And oftentimes we are met with deaf ears by the party. And I think that we see, particularly on our side of the aisle, a lot of political apathy right now, and people just seeing like it's not very worth it to even engage in the process because they feel very, I would say, disheartened by what they're seeing, both in foreign policy and in terms of the party's response to it. And so I wonder how we go about making our own movements and go about making change from the bottom to the top.
Geoffrey, is there that appetite for you to engage other students, even professors, in debate? Do you have that appetite right now?
You know what? Why not? It's definitely something that would be fun. I haven't thought of it, but it's definitely something I'd be open to, getting myself in the debate and maybe even some of my members as well.
Do you guys feel like you can have constructive debate in 2025? Like, what does constructive debate look like to both of you? I guess I'll start with Ryan.
I think constructive debate is getting people in the room to start with. I think in order to have a conversation, people have to come into it expecting a conversation. When we see a lot of the avenues where we think we see debate, oftentimes people on the street arguing or news interviews that are meant to be divisive. Not this, but like Fox News instances or podcasts, that kind of thing, right? I don't know if that's necessarily debate, but when me and Geoffrey get together, when we want to have a debate, which we're planning later on in the year, these are going to be policy discussions. These are going to be things that are going to be intentionally non-divisive, because that's the point. The point is to discuss how we may believe about certain things in the economy using data, how we believe about certain facts about potential, fiscal policy in the state of Connecticut or in the United States. And I think that it's just about having, kind of a scholarly discussion. We're going to go in with our sources, we're going to back it up, and we're going to make the best possible argument for what we believe in. And ultimately, the baseline, the through line that makes debate possible is respect. And I have a great deal of respect for Geoffrey and the Yukon Republicans, and I'm happy that we have such a great relationship. And I think that's the foundation for our ability to be able to have positive debate on campus.
Look, so I think civil debate, as Ryan said, it should look like there's no personal attacks. It's strictly policy. We don't interrupt each other. We speak on our issues in a respectful manner. And I think those kind of things are important in order to get your point across. I think when you're attacking someone personally or interrupting, as we've seen, especially at the national political level, you don't really get the message to your viewers, and you incite a type of behavior in which people believe stuff like that is okay, and it's not okay. In order to have productive and civil debate, it's important that we take those measures in order to have a good discussion.
There's in-person debate, and there's also a back and forth that happens online. And with social media, the audience gets larger, so there's kind of that performative aspect to it as well. Can you all talk about that and how you approach debating politics online, if you do at all?
I personally try to stay away from online. I think there's a lot of negativity that goes with it, and especially because you don't necessarily see the person you're speaking to, a lot of bad things can come from that. So I personally, when I speak on my views and I speak to other people who may not agree with me, I think I like to keep it in person, personally for me.
And when it comes online, I think that one thing that me and Geoffrey both probably really, really wish is that people would stop attaching us to random folks online that say that they represent our organizations or everything that we believe in. I think that there's a lot of radical, crazy people that you see on Twitter that are saying things that say they're Democrats or this kind of thing. And that's not what we believe in. I really hope that we don't get attached to every person on Twitter that's saying something insane,
Or TikTok.
Or TikTok. And I think that happens to Republicans as well, too, right? And I hope that when people look at our character, they look at what we as organizations have actually done and said, as opposed to what people are attaching us to in discourse.
So what's happening a lot online is this willingness to, or at least this appetite to try to own the other person. Mm-hmm. You guys have to debate each other. You said you may debate each other later this year. So you want to win the debate, but there's also respect, right? So do you think about dominating the other guy or trying to own the other person? Is it constructive to do that?
No, my goal when debating is not to belittle the person across the aisle. My goal is to explain my points, explain how my points may be better than theirs. And also there's an audience involved. So I don't see the point in attacking or trying to take down my opponent when I'm also trying to express my views to the audience as well. And I don't think it's very productive if you do something like that.
Can I ask you guys a big picture question here? What do you think needs to change right now in American political discourse? And I guess I asked that question with the backdrop from both the perspective of what needs to change on college campuses, but also what needs to change among the adults in Washington, D.C. I know you two are both adults, you're college students, but you have fantastic influences here in Washington, D.C., I would imagine.
Well, this is something that me and Geoffrey were just talking about, actually. This is one of those instances where it seems silly, but I wish that the adults would take the example of the kids in the room in this instance, right? When we saw violence, when we met something terrible, we came together instantly and we disavowed and we put together a statement that showed that in the state of Connecticut, in our community, this is never going to be tolerated. I think when we look at political divisiveness, this is stuff that comes from the top down. This is stuff that comes from the president and the Democratic leadership as well, too, kind of getting into a 24/7 bickering argument, trying to own each other or be cute on social media, while at the same time we have people who can't afford payments for their groceries at this point. We have people that are struggling in the United States. And I think that the response to it has been two sides trying to outcool each other, right? That's not what we're interested in from a local level. But what we are interested in is the policies that impact people's day-to-day lives and that are important to us. And I think this thing of like owning people is for social media. It's for audiences, right? We're here for constituents. We're here for people that depend on real policy.
How are college Democrats and Republicans engaging each other at UConn? Why are you thinking that it's important to talk?
Well, it's important to talk because we've seen time and time again that our leaders obviously haven't done the same. We've seen the rhetoric that's been going on this show exactly. About a month ago, Chris Murphy said that we need to fight fire with fire. That kind of rhetoric is why things like this may happen. We need to be careful in the way we speak. So I think it's up to us. I think Ryan and I have an obligation to be better than our leaders because this is a top-down issue, and it's important for us to be a better example.
We talked about how both of you have chatted since the Kirk shooting and have kept in touch. Is there anything you're saying regarding how your party is handling things that is positive, how the national party is handling things, maybe some of the local parties? Is there a way that you're complimenting the other side, so to speak, Ryan?
We have a major, major, major issue with our ability to retain young voters within the Democratic Party right now. And, I think that the Republicans have done a tremendously better job of not only investing in organizations to target young voters, but also actually bringing young voters into the fold of their organizations and treating them seriously. I think that, obviously, I believe in the Democratic platform. Those are the policy positions that I believe in, those that I advocate in. But I think that if you went to the University of Connecticut amongst a lecture hall of registered Democrats who are below the age of 30, you could not find one of them that's happy with party leadership at this point. I think from a standpoint of not only how we seem to have caved on every level to the point that we don't have any energy on the national standpoint, and from the fact that people really feel in a place where their political beliefs are not properly being represented by the leadership at this point, that, I think there's a real crisis in confidence within the Democratic Party leadership from young voters right now that I'm not saying can't be mended. I think that the entire purpose of organizations like College Democrats of Connecticut and UConn College Democrats is to mend that relationship and bring young people back into the fold. But the Republicans have done a much better job of bringing young people into theirs. And for that's something that I will always have to commend them for it, because I hope we can do the same.
So Ryan was able to help me out there with something he thinks that's positive on the other side, and also something that party leadership on his end needs to change. Can you kind of go in both directions there?
Yeah, like I said, Ryan and the College Democrats have been willing to debate. They've been willing to discuss what's going on. And I think from a national level, I think we just need to stop with the back and forth. I think it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And overall, I think the back and forth on Twitter, for example, and the gut shots, that the gotcha moments that we see in national politics, is just not worth it, and it's not needed for any reason other than political attacking.
We are taping this day one of the latest government shutdown, so much of today's political climate seems to reward hardline positions versus more traditional compromise. Why do you think that is?
We live in a media state. It's unfortunate, but I think the position of a politician in the 21st century is just as much of a media figure as much as it is a lawmaker. And I think that we have to have discussions about whether or not that's a positive thing. I really don't believe it is, that we're forcing politicians to be in this position. But unfortunately, to win elections in the United States, you have to be trendy in some odd way. And I think that people are trying to attach themselves to hardline positions to say, more and more controversial things on the news to be able to get airtime. And I think it's unfortunately a symptom of the current political environment that we have, that it happens to everybody. Everybody's trying to get, their viral clip out. And I think that's, for many people, they view it as a pathway to political success.
Geoffrey, I just want to know, so much of today's political rhetoric is heated and divisive. Do you see that changing anytime soon? Why or why not?
I hope it does. Unfortunately, I don't think it will.
Me and Geoffrey disagree on policy all the time. But when we do it, we joke around, and we know that these are important, right? And we have our own perspectives on these things, but we have a good relationship that at the end of the day is built on respect. And I think that that's the path forward. And I think that it's through leadership like ours and people hopefully that will take that impetus to be able to be more respectful. And I think that happens on the college level where we grew up, watching the political system degrade in the last 8 years and become more divisive. And I think it's up to us to say that we don't want to live that way anymore.
You've been listening to Ryan Rosario, who's the president of College Democrats at the University of Connecticut. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Geoffrey Medeiros, the president of College Republicans at the University of Connecticut. Thank you for coming on the Wheelhouse.
Thank you. Great to be here.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is the Wheelhouse. Coming up, we'll have a reaction to what the students had to say today from two professors that teach political science in Connecticut. Before we do that, though, I'll tell you about our fall pledge drive. I told you on the show recently that federal lawmakers cut $2.1 million annually worth of funding to Connecticut Public. Do listen in to my colleagues to see how they're reacting to the news and how you can help. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Earlier in the show, we spoke to two young campus political leaders at the University of Connecticut about how they're carrying on with political discourse amid a government shutdown and divisive rhetoric surrounding political violence. Now let's talk to two of our Wheelhouse regulars, a couple of professors that talk to poli-sci students about this kind of thing all the time. Bilal Siku, the associate professor of politics and government at the University of Hartford. Good morning,
Good
Bilal.
morning, Frankie, and go Hawks.
Good morning to you as well. Go Hawks, go Owls. Jonathan Wharton is an associate professor of political science, and look at him looking dashing this morning, and urban affairs at Southern Connecticut State University. Hello and welcome back, Preppy Prof.
Good morning, Professor, and go Owls.
We'll try to sneak in some calls here in the final minutes. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Be sure to comment on YouTube as well. Quick thoughts on political discourse in 2025. I want to get both of your reactions to what the students said. And let's start, Jonathan, with something UConn Democrats President Ryan Rosario said. It's not always beautiful, but there needs to be debate. Both sides, even if controversial, need to have free speech on campus. What does that mean to you, Jonathan?
Well, I like the fact that they both brought up the framework in which they plan to articulate, whether it's in the classroom or even among clubs and organizations. I'm not surprised by the responses. In fact, I very much appreciated what they offered, both Ryan and Geoffrey. And so I see the same thing. I'm sure that Bob does too at University of Hartford, at Southern, because both College Democrats and College Republican chapters have always been, not always, but for the most part, they are civil with one another, especially publicly. They actually organize similarly a debate every spring. We saw this back in April. We saw it the year before last. As a matter of fact, usually about 100 students show up, and it's unusual to have parents there. So you'd be surprised. This generational interest around finding a pathway of communication is something that I clearly see in both the classroom and among the student organizations. And if anything, I'm very much appreciative of this fact, despite what many people might think about the future of both parties.
Super quickly, was there a similar kind of joint statement or something like that between conservative or liberal-leaning students after the Kirk shooting?
The interesting thing about UHART is that we really don't have those clubs that are really strong on campus. But I have to say, I was really impressed, with the interview. I really thought the country could learn a lot from listening to those two young men. And I'm actually going to encourage my students to watch, that interview, because I just thought, what they talked about, especially the way they framed the need for civil discourse and civility, was really important. And I think national leaders could learn a lot from listening to young people like that.
Well,
Frankie, if I can chime in too.
Go ahead. Sorry.
One thing to not overlook too, and I hope you bring this up as well to your classes, is that actually the young Democrats and young Republicans put out a statement that same day when Charlie Kirk was assassinated.
Yes.
So, that was quite interesting. It kind of piggybacks on everything that the two students brought up from UConn. So, the fact that they're bringing this out right now is fascinating. It's very interesting.
Bilal, Rosario in our interview brought up an encampment at the University of Connecticut where protesters advocated on behalf of Gazans who were arrested. The students were to say that there are students from the left that are worried about free speech. He even talked about doxing after expressing their beliefs that maybe the Canary Project was doing something like that. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. I think students in general are worried about talking about their political beliefs. I mean, obviously, what we're hearing out of Washington and some of the threats that are being made against people who, in fact, are protesting the war in Gaza really suggests that students are probably wise to be worried about those kinds of things. I think at the same time, also, what I was struck by, in listening to this particular conversation about Kirk, and I know from my own conversation, hopefully we'll get into details about that. One of the things that happened that I also thought was really bizarre about that day, I tackled those issues. I teach courses on American national government. We talk about controversial issues. In that class, I encourage civil, exchange of ideas, agreement, disagreement. But what I was struck by was how many of my colleagues were really nervous about having that discussion that day about Kirk. And it really struck me that there is this tone in the country right now where people are in fact fearful of expressing their political views. And so that's why I was really moved to hear young people say that this is really important to do, especially for young people to do, and that they are creating that space for those kinds of conversations. As I said before, many of us adults need to learn from that and also be willing to take some risk to get out there and encourage young people to talk, but also not to be silent ourselves.
Something, especially talking about silence here, something that the Yukon Republican Geoffrey Medeiros said, Jonathan, is that he feels conservative voices are silenced on campuses and that some students may feel like there is potential for reprisal if they share a particular view, if they argue a particular view. He pointed to a recent survey outlined by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression that says students are increasingly self-censoring. How does that square with what you're seeing on campus and what your students are telling you, Jonathan?
Well, there's an overwhelming concern about being politically correct. And one could argue maybe that's just an aspect of wokeism, if you want to argue that. But I think it's also an element of also finding a pathway of not only communicating, but also, being at least civil about it. That's kind of the gray area that many of us need to consider, no matter what space it is, in the classrooms, organizations, or even publicly. And so that needs to be kind of, threaded out. To Wheelhouse's point, I see something similar among the faculty who, at Southern, and I've heard writ large that, how do you go about this carefully? And it's a difficult matter. It's not like there's a guideline or a book on how to provide all of this. And so, this is still going to be an ongoing concern as to, how does one go about communicating this effectively and amicably, if that's even plausible. And it's a difficult challenge when you have the national parties kind of at each other's throats as they're closing down the government.
Can I just real quickly,
Absolutely.
But I think at the same time, it's really important for us as faculty members to create the space for these conversations. As I said, I teach, 2 courses that essentially deal with American national government. I talk about civil liberties and civil rights. I talk about, some of the issues that are confronting the country and really encourage my students to weigh in, though civilly, but to weigh in on those issues and to disagree with each other. The one thing I think I often experience is students come out of the classroom because I'm really pushing hard for them to make their point, to defend their point, to talk about why they believe what they believe. And to me, that's our job. That's what we should be doing in the classroom and not shying away even from controversial topics.
That's your job, okay? So now let's ask you guys if you both believe your classroom is a safe space for that kind of dialogue, and then please provide exampbles.
Well, I'll tell you,
Jonathan? Okay.
I tend to go the opposite direction. No surprise, Bob. I know it's the only reason why Frankie likes us on the show every once in a while. I mean, it's not the disagreement.
That's it, not because of how beautiful you're looking this morning.
Look at you. Don't even start, Frankie. Now that you're the big professor at UConn, I love it. It's like a faculty now.
He's one of us now.
Civility is nice. Civility is a nice thing, guys. Go ahead, Jonathan.
But no, I'm quite the opposite. I am one who will remind students, sit back and listen. Don't just talk and espouse,
Okay.
Understand other sides, other perspective, and instead just sit back and listen, take it in, maybe find a pathway of responding back, which I appreciate and respect. But in my classes, I have just about everybody talking and engaging. But you'd be surprised how many students just sit back and listen, kind of let things resonate a bit. And they're not so immediate to reply back, which is a good thing. I think there's something to be said about stressing that you don't always have to communicate everything. And to be frank with you, one strategy I tend to talk my students into is to being, at least no surprise, sarcastic or witty at least to at least so you can at least find a way to break the ice and find a pathway to communicating more effectively.
Yeah.
Can you just help me out with a positive example first before I go to Bilal? And maybe any kind of example you have of something happening in your classroom where you feel like it was constructive dialogue?
Yeah, even recently, it's interesting. I don't know why my students have been obsessed about what's going on in Hartford with the affordability housing bill. I know that's near and dear WNPR's heart, but we've been discussing this, especially as it relates to urban
Everybody
politics.
in the state is, especially policymakers.
I was about to say, and so one might think that this is all national stuff, when in fact, a lot of students are following what's going on at the state level, especially the students from Fairfield County. Yeah, and so for that, I'm kind of struck by how many students see, different angles, different perspectives. And what I tell them and remind them is, hey, look and consider how other states challenge and address these issues too when it comes to affordable housing. Don't be so stuck on just Fairfield County.
Yeah. Interestingly for me, recently I talked about civil liberties. And so I had an opportunity to talk about freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and also really the First Amendment in general. We got into some discussions about religious liberties, religious freedoms. And what was interesting to me, and I guess to the extent that Jonathan, I think we are actually very similar, but to the extent that we may be a bit different as I try to pull most of my students into the conversation. So I'll call on people and I'll ask them to weigh in on these issues. I use a lot of humor in the class. I can be really silly sometimes when I'm teaching, but just a classic example of that, we had this really fascinating debate about what is hate speech, for example. We talked about what, for example, is dangerous speech, right? And so we got into this interesting discussion about, someone putting instructions to build a bomb on the internet, and the students really divided sharply about whether something like that was dangerous speech. And then I said, let me trip them up. I come in the next day and I want to talk about banning rap music. And so we had this great conversation back and forth. Students who were prepared to ban putting instructions on how to build a bomb were adamantly opposed to doing anything about rap music. And then I gave them that history of some of the things that happened during the 80s and the 90s around efforts to really ban, hip hop and rap music. And I think from that standpoint, the students really got a deeper understanding.
2 Live Crew, Ice-T.
Exactly. And the way the conversation ended, of course, because this is my sort of style to play the devil's advocate and really to push them, the students start to ask me, and they went around the room. So what do you think? Should it be banned? What do you think? And I said, doesn't matter what I think. I'm here to learn what you think and to have you share with each other.
I want to know if there's any controversial speakers, or at least somebody that one person at the university or a few people may find controversial coming to either of your campuses anytime soon, or at least they're trying to reach out. Because I want to know what that looks like in the future. Logistically, we had a major shooting happen that was outside of the university. Are people trying to move events inside? Do you guys have any kind of insight into this?
I haven't heard anything recently.
Or how you would handle it, I guess, too, as well.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank with you, we have quite a coordinating effort when there are moments, let's say. Even when we do the debates, we're very certain having campus police there, for example. And it's not unusual when dignitaries, which we have a number of them come through, from the systems office, let alone to even, people within the governor's circle who will come in. And so I have to give credit to Southern. They're very effective. The campus police is great to coordinate these things with. And so it's, do we get bombastic speakers for the clubs? No, that's something that generally doesn't happen. But anytime there are speakers, or we've even had lawmakers come in, I usually alert campus police, to be frank with you, just to at least find, just in case.
Without that real club representation at UHART, I think it would probably be you that would invite speakers to campus, right? I mean, you invited me, Graziano, one time.
And that was a controversial day, of course.
What would you?
Where was my invite?
Soon enough, preppy prof. But you would be inviting people. So what would you have
certainly,
to consider?
Whenever someone comes to campus, and I think we have seen this happen because, the way the rhetoric has sort of risen on a number of college campuses over a number of years. It isn't just recently that the presence of public safety is something that we routinely see. Again, as a small, private institution, we don't have the big bucks to bring in some of those really big speakers with the most controversial of topics. But I will say, given the history of the university, I think certainly the war in Gaza and some of the issues around Israel has really presented just interesting sort of conversation. I had a student the other day come in my office who really talked about struggling with some of the conversations. He's a Jewish student. And so it's that realization that, those kinds of topics on a campus, like most college campuses now, they're incredibly diverse. We have Muslim students, students from the Middle East, students who are Jewish, African-American, Latino. And so I think our job as faculty is to create the space where these conversations can occur in a respectful way, and that students can share their beliefs, their ideas, agree to disagree, and do it in a way that's civil.
Creating the discourse is what Bilal wants to do. Can I get 20 seconds, something quick from you, Jonathan, on what you're going to do to harvest kind of constructive dialogue on your campus?
Well, beyond our spring debates we do between the clubs, one thing is to communicate, even as Bilal's bringing it up, even among faculty. You'd be surprised how much that needs to be centered too in terms of how to go about addressing and resolving this. We need a roadmap, clearly, and a rubric, and I think that kind of communication at the faculty level needs to take place. So I'm trying my best to, partake in that directly, especially within the faculty senate.
You've been listening to Bilal Siku, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford. Bilal, great to have you on.
Thanks a lot.
We had a great conversation. Also, Jonathan Wharton was there, Associate Professor of Political Science and Urban Affairs at Southern Connecticut State University. Thank you for coming on the show today, Jonathan.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn. It was dazzling. It was edited by Patrick Scahill. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Special thanks to Tess Terrible, Megan Fitzgerald, Connecticut Public's visuals team, and our operations team. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.